They laughed when a broke widowed father bought a cave carved into a hillside for less than the price of a used car, calling it the worst investment in town history. But when he found the tunnel buried 30 feet below the stone floor, what emerged wasn't just $275 million in hidden treasure. It was proof that the quietest, most broken people sometimes hold the keys to the most extraordinary secrets. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning Marcus Brennan received the foreclosure notice, the sky over Redmont Valley was the color of old bruises, purple, gray, and fading at the edges like hope itself was dying. He sat in his battered Ford truck outside the post office, hands trembling as he read the words printed on official letterhead for the third time, willing them to change, willing this to be some kind of mistake. Final notice: 30 days to remit payment. Failure to comply will result in seizure of property and assets. The paper crinkled in his grip, and for a moment Marcus considered crumpling it into a ball and throwing it out the window. Maybe if he didn't look at it, it wouldn't be real. Maybe if he ignored it long enough, the universe would take pity on him and make it disappear. But the universe hadn't shown him much pity in the last 2 years, and he doubted it would start now. In the back seat, his 7-year-old son Ethan hummed quietly to himself, coloring in a dinosaur book with the intense concentration only children possess. His tongue stuck out slightly from the corner of his mouth, sandy blonde hair falling across his forehead in the exact same way Sarah's used to. The resemblance hit Marcus like a punch to the gut every single time. His son was blissfully unaware that their world was crumbling faster than Marcus could patch it together. Unaware that in 30 days they'd have nowhere to live, unaware that his father was one bad decision away from complete collapse. Marcus pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried 2 years of grief, exhaustion, and bone-deep desperation. The vinyl was cracked beneath his skin, held together with duct tape and stubbornness, much like Marcus himself these days. Sarah had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer, swift and merciless, had torn through her body like wildfire, giving them barely 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. One day she was laughing over breakfast, teasing Marcus about his terrible coffee-making skills, planning Ethan's 6th birthday party. 6 months later, Marcus was picking out a casket, choosing flowers, and trying to explain to a sobbing 5-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. The medical bills had arrived like an invading army. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments, hospital stays, specialist consultations, equipment, medications with names Marcus couldn't pronounce, and price tags that made him physically ill. The insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. The life insurance policy Sarah had taken out years ago barely covered the funeral costs and maybe 3 months of mortgage payments. And now, 2 years later, working 3 part-time jobs, stocking shelves at the grocery store before dawn, doing landscaping on weekends, and mopping floors at the elementary school every evening, still wasn't enough to keep the bank from taking the small 2-bedroom house they'd bought when Ethan was born. The house where Sarah had painted the nursery yellow. The house where they'd celebrated every birthday and Christmas. The house that held every memory of the life they'd built together. Marcus was 41 years old, and he felt ancient, hollowed out, like someone had scooped out his insides and left only a shell that went through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Ethan, whose concentration had shifted from dinosaurs to drawing what looked like a castle. His son's resilience amazed him. Ethan still smiled, still laughed, still found joy in small things like finding a cool rock or watching cartoons. That smile was the only thing keeping Marcus upright most days, the only reason he got out of bed when every part of him wanted to stay there forever. "Daddy?" Ethan looked up, his blue eyes, Sarah's eyes, meeting Marcus's in the mirror. "Yeah, buddy?"
"Can we get pancakes?"
Marcus swallowed hard, checking his mental calculation of their bank account. $17.32 until Friday's paycheck. Pancakes at the diner were $3.99 for the kids' stack. He could survive on coffee and whatever samples they put out at the grocery store. "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "Pancakes sound perfect." They sat in their usual booth at Ruby's Diner, the one by the window with the cracked vinyl seat that whistled when you sat down. Ethan devoured his pancakes with syrup-sticky enthusiasm, while Marcus nursed a cup of black coffee and pretended to look at the newspaper someone had left behind. He wasn't reading, though. His eyes kept drifting unfocused across the pages while his mind spiraled through impossible math. 30 days. Security deposit on a rental. First month's rent. Moving costs. He had nothing. Less than nothing. The credit cards were maxed out. His parents were dead. Sarah's parents had moved to Florida years ago and barely kept in contact. He had no siblings, no safety net, no plan. That's when he saw it. At the bottom of the classifieds section, almost like it had been placed there specifically for him to find, was a listing so bizarre it stopped his spiraling thoughts cold. Unique property, cave house carved into hillside, 1962 construction, needs work, $8,500 or best offer, cash only, serious inquiries only. There was a phone number, no address, no photo, just those few cryptic lines that seemed to pulse on the page like they were alive. Marcus read it 3 times. A cave house? Who lived in a cave? What did that even mean? But the price, $8,500. He had $9,200 left from selling Sarah's car last month. Money he'd been hoarding like a dragon protecting gold, knowing it was all that stood between them and complete destitution. Money that was supposed to go toward a security deposit on whatever cheap rental he could find. But this could be actual ownership. No landlord, no monthly rent bleeding them dry. Weird, probably terrible, possibly uninhabitable ownership, but ownership nonetheless. His hand moved toward his phone before his brain could talk him out of it. The call connected on the 3rd ring. A gruff voice answered, suspicious and tired. "Yeah? Hi, I'm calling about the cave house listing in the classifieds?" Silence, then a laugh, dark and amused. "You serious? Is it still available?" "Son, that place has been available since I inherited it from my uncle 5 years ago. Nobody in their right mind wants to live in a hole carved into a hillside." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, pride and desperation warring in his chest. "I might be interested. Can I see it?" Another pause. Longer this time. "You got cash?" "I've got $7,500, Marcus lied smoothly, testing the waters. "Always negotiate lower." The man didn't even hesitate. "Done. When can you come look at it?" Marcus blinked in surprise. That was it? No negotiation? No questions? "This afternoon? Meet me at mile marker 14 on County Road 47, 2 o'clock. Bring cash if you're serious." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, heart pounding. What had he just done? He didn't even know if the place was livable. Didn't know anything except that it was carved into a hillside and apparently nobody wanted it. "Daddy?" Ethan was watching him with syrup on his chin. "What's wrong?" Marcus reached across the table and wiped his son's face with a napkin, forcing a smile. "Nothing, buddy. Everything's going to be okay." He hoped he wasn't lying. That afternoon, Marcus drove 20 minutes outside Redmont Valley with Ethan strapped in the back seat, asking endless questions about where they were going and why, and could they stop for ice cream on the way back. The landscape shifted from desert scrub to rocky hills, the kind of terrain that looked beautiful in photographs, but felt harsh and unforgiving in person. At mile marker 14, a beat-up Chevy truck was parked on the shoulder. A man in his 60s stepped out, wearing overalls and a skeptical expression that suggested he'd seen too much of life's disappointments to expect anything good. "You Marcus?" he called out. "That's me." Marcus climbed out, then helped Ethan down. "This is my son Ethan." The man gave a curt nod.
Dale, follow me.
They walked a quarter-mile down a dirt road that barely qualified as a road, more like 2 tire tracks through red dust and scrub brush. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Marcus could feel sweat soaking through his shirt. Ethan held his hand tightly, unusually quiet, sensing this was important somehow. Then Dale stopped and pointed. "There she is." Marcus followed his gesture and felt his breath catch. The cave house was built directly into the face of a rust-colored cliff that rose maybe 50 feet into the cloudless sky. The entrance had been carved smooth, with thick wooden beams framing what looked like a massive door made from planks that had weathered to silver gray. 2 small windows flanked the entrance, fitted with glass so old it was wavy and discolored. Above the door, carved into the rock itself, was a date, 1962. It looked like something from a fantasy novel, or a nightmare. Marcus honestly couldn't tell which. "Who built this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dale shrugged. "My uncle bought it from some rich eccentric back in the 70s. Guy supposedly built it as a Cold War bunker. Whole thing goes back about 40 feet into the cliff, maybe more. Got electricity, plumbing, the works. It's weird as hell, but it's solid." Marcus approached slowly, Ethan's hand still in his. The closer he got, the more imposing it became. The door was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with iron hinges that looked like they could support a bank vault. The air around the entrance was noticeably cooler, like the rock itself was breathing out.
Can we go inside?
Marcus asked. Dale pulled out a heavy iron key that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. "After you." The key turned with a solid click that echoed against the cliff face. Dale pushed, and the door swung inward with surprising smoothness, barely a creak from those ancient hinges. Cool air rushed out, carrying the scent of stone and earth and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. Age, maybe. History. Marcus stepped inside and stopped cold. The main room was larger than he'd expected, maybe 20 feet deep and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling that arched overhead about 10 feet up. The walls were smooth stone, cool to the touch, with wooden beams running across the ceiling for support. Natural light filtered through the 2 front windows, but Dale flipped a switch and overhead bulbs flickered to life, casting yellowish light across the space. To the left was a small kitchen area carved into the rock wall. A sink, an old gas stove, a few wooden cabinets that looked handmade. To the right, a narrow hallway disappeared into darkness, presumably leading to other rooms. The floor was smooth concrete, surprisingly level, and the temperature, it had to be at least 15 degrees cooler in here than outside. "It stays cool in summer, warm in winter," Dale said. "Rock's a natural insulator. You won't need much heating or cooling." Ethan had released Marcus's hand and was exploring, his small voice echoing strangely off the stone walls. "Dad! Dad, this is so cool! It's like a castle. Are we really going to live here?" Marcus couldn't answer. He was too busy trying to process what he was seeing, feeling, sensing. This wasn't a house, this was something else. Something impossible. A home carved from living rock, hidden in a hillside nobody cared about, waiting for someone desperate enough or crazy enough to claim it. He walked down the hallway, Dale following with a flashlight. 2 small rooms branched off, one barely big enough for a twin bed, the other slightly larger. Both had been carved with the same meticulous care as the main room, walls smooth, corners square. "Bathroom's functional," Dale said, pointing to a 3rd door. "Previous owner installed everything back in the day. Septic tanks out back, well, water pumps fine. It's all legal, up to code as of '74 when the last inspection happened." Marcus returned to the main room where Ethan was running his hands along the stone walls, marveling at their coolness. His son turned to him with eyes shining with wonder and excitement. "Daddy, can we really live here, please? It's like we're hobbits?" Something in Marcus's chest shifted. Maybe it was the desperation, Maybe it was the way Ethan looked at this bizarre cave, not as a sign of their poverty, but as an adventure. Maybe it was just exhaustion making him reckless. He turned to Dale. $7,500, cash, today. Dale studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Deal. I'll have the deed papers drawn up. You can sign tomorrow. They shook on it, and Marcus felt the weight of the decision settle over him like a physical thing. He'd just bought a cave, an actual cave carved into a cliff, with money that was supposed to save them. The people of Redmont Valley were going to think he'd lost his mind. They weren't wrong. News traveled fast in small towns. By the time Marcus showed up for his shift at the grocery store the next morning, everyone knew. His manager, Carl, pulled him aside before he'd even clocked in, concern and disbelief warring on his weathered face.
Marcus, is it true? Did you really buy Old Man Pritchard's cave?
Marcus kept his eyes on his time card. Yeah, closing on it today. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Carl ran a hand through his thinning hair. That place is a death trap. It's been sitting empty for decades. The structure could be compromised. You could be putting your boy in danger. It's shelter, Marcus said quietly, fighting to keep his voice steady. It's something I can afford to own outright. No mortgage, no landlord, no monthly rent I can't make. It's a hole in the side of a mountain, Carl shot back, not unkindly. People are going to think— I know what people are going to think, Marcus interrupted. They're going to think I've lost it, that I'm a terrible father, that I'm making the worst decision of my life. He finally looked up, meeting Carl's eyes. Maybe they're right, but it's the only decision I've got. Carl opened his mouth, closed it, then just nodded sadly. All right. But if you need anything— I know, thank you. But Carl's concern was nothing compared to what happened at the town council meeting that evening. Marcus had to attend to register his new property address for tax purposes, to get Ethan enrolled in the correct school district from the cave house's location. He'd hoped to slip in and out quietly, file his paperwork, and disappear before anyone noticed. That hope died the moment he walked into the small meeting room in the basement of the community center. Council President Diane Marshall was mid-sentence about garbage collection schedules when she spotted Marcus. Her perfectly styled silver hair and crisp business suit seemed to shimmer with judgment. She stopped talking, and every head in the room turned toward him. "Mr. Brennan," she said into the microphone, her voice echoing off the water-stained ceiling tiles. "How lovely of you to join us. I understand you have some paperwork to file?" Marcus approached the front table, hyper-aware of every eye tracking his movement. "Yes, ma'am. Just need to register my new address for tax and school purposes." "Your new address?" Diane's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "And would that be the cave property you purchased from Dale Pritchard?" Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Someone snickered. Marcus felt heat creeping up his neck. "Yes, ma'am." A cave. She said it like she was testing the word, seeing how absurd it sounded out loud. "Mr. Brennan, is it true you're planning to raise your young son in a cave carved into a hillside?" The murmurs grew louder. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. "It's a house built into a hillside using 1962 construction techniques. It has electricity, plumbing, insulation." "It's a hole in the ground," Councilman Ted Porter interrupted from his seat at the table. His red face suggested this wasn't his first public speaking event after visiting the bar. "Do you understand how this reflects on our community? We're trying to attract new businesses, new families, and here you are, living like some kind of caveman with a child in tow." Anger flared hot and bright in Marcus's chest. "I'm living in what I can afford, Councilman, unless you'd like to help with my mortgage payments on a traditional house." That shut him up, but Diane jumped back in smoothly. "No one is questioning your financial struggles, Mr. Brennan. We all sympathize with what you've been through, losing your wife so young. But surely there were better options than purchasing what is essentially a condemned structure." "It's not condemned," Marcus said through gritted teeth. It passed inspection in 1974 and the structure is solid rock. My son will be safer there than in some of the rentals I looked at in this town, let me tell you that much. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. People shifted in their metal folding chairs. Someone coughed. "Well?" Diane said, her voice dripping with false sympathy that made Marcus want to scream. "I suppose that's your choice to make. But please don't expect the town to step in when, not if, when, that cave collapses and endangers your child. We'll approve your paperwork, but let the record show that several council members expressed serious concerns about the safety and appropriateness of this living arrangement." Marcus grabbed the papers she slid across the table, signed them with trembling hands, and walked out before he said something he'd regret. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Tears of frustration and shame burned behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when Ethan needed him to be strong. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor at the apartment they were about to lose. "Heard you bought a cave? Is that true? Call me." Another text, this one from a coworker. "Dude, everyone's talking about you buying that creepy cave house. You okay?" And another. "Marcus, this is Janet from the PTA. I'm concerned about Ethan's well-being in an unconventional living situation. Can we talk?" Marcus turned off his phone and drove home. Well, to the apartment that wouldn't be home much longer. Tomorrow was moving day. Tomorrow the whole town would watch him pack his pathetic belongings into his failing truck and drive them to a cave in the hills. Tomorrow everyone's whispers and judgment would become public spectacle. He couldn't wait. Moving day dawned gray and cool, unusual for Arizona, but fitting for the occasion. Marcus had exactly 4 things to move. 2 duffel bags of clothes, a box of kitchen supplies, Ethan's toys and books in a plastic bin, and their sleeping bags. 2 years ago they'd had furniture, decorations, a life's worth of accumulated possessions. Now they had what fit in the bed of a truck. Marcus loaded everything while Ethan sat on the apartment steps watching with big eyes. His son hadn't complained once, hadn't cried or thrown a tantrum like some kids might. He'd just accepted this new reality with a resilience that broke Marcus's heart. "Ready, buddy?" Marcus asked, closing the tailgate. Ethan nodded and climbed into the truck. As they pulled away from the apartment complex, Marcus didn't look back. Looking back would break him. The drive through town should have taken 10 minutes. It took 20 because Marcus drove slowly, hyper-aware of the people on sidewalks who stopped and stared, who pointed and whispered to each other. At a stoplight, 2 women he vaguely recognized from the grocery store stood on the corner talking, their eyes locked on his truck. He could read their lips. That's him. That's the guy who bought the cave. At the school pickup zone, a cluster of mothers stopped their conversation to watch him pass. Their expressions a mix of pity and judgment that made Marcus feel about 2 inches tall. By the time he turned onto County Road 47, his jaw ached from clenching it so hard. "Daddy?" Ethan's small voice cut through the silence. Why were those people looking at us weird? Marcus exhaled slowly. "Because we're different, buddy. We're doing something they don't understand." "Is that bad?" "No, different isn't bad. It's just different." Ethan seemed to consider this, then shrugged with the easy acceptance of childhood. "I think our cave house is cool, way cooler than a regular house." Marcus reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The cave house looked less intimidating in daylight, Marcus decided as he parked. The rust-red rock glowed warm in the afternoon sun, and the shadows around the entrance seemed welcoming rather than ominous. Or maybe that was just desperation making him see what he needed to see. They unloaded their meager belongings in 3 trips. Marcus set up Ethan's sleeping bag in the smaller room, arranging his stuffed animals and books to make it feel homey. His own sleeping bag went in the slightly larger room, though calling it a bedroom felt generous. It was barely big enough to turn around in. That first evening they ate peanut butter sandwiches sitting on the concrete floor of the main room by the light of a battery-powered lantern. Half the light bulbs were burned out, and Marcus hadn't had time to buy replacements. He made a mental list of things they needed: bulbs, groceries, cleaning supplies, maybe a cheap table and chairs if he could find them at a thrift store. The list felt impossibly long. "Dad?" Ethan's voice echoed strangely in the quiet space. "Can I explore?"
"Sure, buddy. Just stay where I can see you."
Ethan wandered around the main room, running his hands along the smooth stone walls, marveling at how cool they were despite the warmth outside. He discovered that sounds bounced in weird ways. A whisper in one corner could be heard clearly across the room. He stomped his feet and laughed at the way the sound echoed. Marcus watched his son find joy in this bizarre place and felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe this cave could become home. After Ethan finally fell asleep, exhausted from excitement and exploration, Marcus sat alone in the main room with his back against the stone wall. The silence was profound, almost oppressive. No traffic noise, no neighbors walking overhead, no sounds of modern life. Just the faint whistle of wind across the hillside and the occasional creak of settling rock. For the first time since Sarah died, Marcus let himself cry. Really cry. Not the quiet tears he'd shed in the shower so Ethan wouldn't hear, but the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place of complete exhaustion and grief and fear. He cried for Sarah, for the life they'd planned, for the man he used to be before medical bills and poverty had hollowed him out. He cried for Ethan, who deserved so much better than a father barely hanging on. He cried for himself, for how far he'd fallen.
But as the tears finally slowed and Marcus wiped his face with his sleeve, he noticed something strange.
The acoustics in the cave were wrong. When he'd been sobbing, the sound hadn't echoed the way it should have in a space this size. It was almost like the walls were absorbing the sound, or like there was empty space somewhere beyond what he could see. Marcus stood and walked slowly along the back wall, pressing his palm against the cool stone. It felt solid, unchanging. But then, near the corner where the narrow hallway began, he felt it. A subtle difference in temperature. This section of wall was warmer, not hot, just noticeably warmer than the surrounding rock. That didn't make sense. If anything, the deeper sections should be cooler, not warmer. He ran his fingers along the stone, searching for he didn't know what, and then he found it. A seam. Barely visible, a hairline crack running from floor to ceiling, so thin he'd missed it completely in the dim light. Marcus grabbed the lantern and examined the crack more closely. It was too straight, too perfect to be natural. This was man-made, cut deliberately. His heart started beating faster. He followed the seam upward, then across, finding the outline of what could only be a door. Hidden, camouflaged perfectly against the surrounding rock, but definitely a door. He knocked gently with his knuckles. The sound was hollow. There was something behind this wall. A space, a room, something the previous owner had sealed and hidden and never told anyone about. Marcus stepped back, mind racing. Should he investigate now? Wait until morning? Tell someone? But tell them what? That he'd found a hidden door in the cave he'd bought for $7,500? The same cave everyone in town was already mocking him for buying? He glanced toward the hallway where Ethan slept peacefully, blissfully unaware that their strange new home was apparently even stranger than it appeared. Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to open this door and what lay beyond it. Tomorrow he'd discover whether he'd bought just a bizarre house or something far more extraordinary.
Tonight, though, he was too exhausted to do anything but sleep.
He lay down on the hard floor of his tiny room, pulled his jacket over himself like a blanket, and closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could have sworn he heard something, faint, distant, like the whisper of footsteps in a space that shouldn't exist, like a secret breathing just beyond reach, waiting. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Morning in the cave house came quietly, no alarm clocks needed. The darkness was so complete that Marcus woke disoriented, reaching instinctively for Sarah before remembering she was gone, before remembering where he was, before remembering everything. He fumbled for his phone. 5:32, time to get ready for his grocery store shift. He moved through the dim space carefully, not wanting to wake Ethan. The stone floor was cold beneath his bare feet, sending shivers up his spine. In the tiny bathroom, he splashed water on his face and stared at the stranger in the mirror, hollow-eyed, unshaven, looking every one of his 41 years and then some. By 6:15, he was at the store, unloading pallets of canned goods in the back room. His coworker Danny was already there, a kid fresh out of high school who talked too much and asked too many questions. "Dude, is it true you're living in a cave now?" Danny asked, not unkindly, just curious. Marcus kept stacking cans. "It's a house built into a hillside." "But it's underground." "Partially." "That's so weird, man. Is it cold? Does it smell weird? Do you have bats?" "It's fine. No bats. Can we just work?" Danny shrugged and went back to his pallet, but Marcus could feel the unasked questions hovering in the air between them. This was his life now. Constant judgment disguised as concern, pity wrapped in curiosity, people trying to figure out just how far he'd fallen. His shift ended at noon. He had exactly 45 minutes to get home, check on Ethan, make lunch, and get to his landscaping job across town. He'd arranged for Mrs. Chen from the apartment complex to watch Ethan during the day until school started in 2 weeks. She'd agreed to come out to the cave house, though her expression when she first saw it had spoken volumes. When Marcus pulled up, Mrs. Chen was sitting on a folding chair outside the cave entrance, knitting. Ethan was drawing with sidewalk chalk on the smooth rock near the door. "Everything okay?" Marcus called out as he approached. Fine, Mrs. Chen said, but her eyes darted to the cave entrance nervously. "He's a good boy, very quiet today." Marcus paid her $20 he couldn't afford to spare and watched her practically speed walk back to her car. Great, even the babysitter thought he was crazy. "Hey, buddy!" Marcus knelt beside Ethan, examining the chalk drawing. "What are you making?" "A map of our castle," Ethan said seriously. "See? This is the main room, and these are our bedrooms, and this—" He pointed to a large circle he'd drawn. "This is the secret room." Marcus's heart skipped. "Secret room?" "Yeah, I heard something in the walls last night, like footsteps, so there must be secret rooms like in cartoons." Marcus forced a smile. "That was probably just the rock settling, buddy. Old buildings make noises." But his mind immediately went to that hidden door, that seam in the wall he'd found last night. He hadn't imagined it. It was real. And apparently, even Ethan had sensed something was off about their new home. After a quick lunch of grilled cheese sandwiches, Marcus headed to his landscaping job. It was brutal work in the afternoon heat, mowing, trimming, hauling bags of mulch for a client who watched from her air-conditioned house and complained that he'd missed a spot. By the time he finished, his back ached and his hands were blistered. Then it was home again for a quick dinner with Ethan before his evening shift mopping floors at the elementary school. He didn't get back to the cave until after 9. Ethan was already asleep and Marcus was so exhausted he could barely see straight, but he couldn't stop thinking about that wall. This became his routine. Wake before dawn, work the grocery store, race home to check on Ethan, landscaping in the afternoon, janitorial work in the evening. Every day the same exhausting cycle, barely keeping his head above water financially, constantly aware that one missed shift, one illness, one unexpected expense would sink them. But at night, after Ethan slept, Marcus would sit in the main room and stare at that back wall. the hidden seam, the secret door, whatever lay beyond it. He told himself he didn't have time to investigate, told himself it was probably nothing, just a storage closet or a small alcove the previous owner had sealed for some mundane reason. Told himself he was being ridiculous, imagining treasure and mystery like some kind of desperate fool. But the curiosity gnawed at him like a living thing. A week after moving in, Marcus was giving Ethan a bath in the small bathroom when his son looked up at him with those serious blue eyes that were so much like Sarah's it hurt. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would like our cave house?" Marcus paused, washcloth in hand. They didn't talk about Sarah much anymore. It hurt too much, and Marcus had convinced himself that not talking about her made the pain easier to bear. He'd been wrong. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "your mom would have thought it was an adventure. She always loved trying new things." "Tell me a story about Mommy." Marcus sat back against the cool tile wall, memories flooding through him. "Okay. Did I ever tell you about the time she decided we should go camping even though neither of us knew how to camp?" Ethan shook his head, water dripping from his hair. "Well, we were young, maybe 25, and your mom got it in her head that we needed to be outdoorsy people. So we bought a tent from a garage sale and drove up into the mountains without really planning anything. We didn't even check the weather. What happened? It started raining the second we got the tent up. And I mean pouring. We huddled inside this tiny tent that leaked from about 6 different places, eating soggy sandwiches and laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. Your mom kept saying, 'This is character building, we're making memories,' even though we were both soaking wet and miserable." Ethan giggled. "Did you go home?" "Eventually, but not before your mom insisted we make s'mores in the rain. She held an umbrella over the camp stove while I tried to roast marshmallows. They kept falling off the stick into the mud. We probably ate more mud than marshmallow that night." "That's silly." "Yeah, it was." Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes. "Your mom was really good at being silly, at turning disasters into adventures. I think that's why she would have loved this place. She would have seen it as the beginning of something, not the end." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you think she can see us now?" Marcus pulled his son close, not caring that water soaked through his shirt. "I don't know, buddy, but I hope so. I really hope so." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about how she'd always believed things would work out somehow, even when they seemed impossible, about how she'd face down Marcus's pessimism with stubborn optimism and usually prove him wrong, about how she'd tell him to stop overthinking and just act. He stood and walked to the back wall, to the hidden door. "Okay, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what's behind here." He'd been planning this for days, gathering supplies during his breaks at work. He had a crowbar now, borrowed from the landscaping shed, a heavy-duty flashlight, work gloves, a hammer, everything he needed to break through if he had to. Marcus examined the seam carefully in the flashlight beam, looking for any kind of trigger mechanism or hidden latch. The crack ran floor to ceiling, then across, outlining a door roughly 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. He ran his fingers along every inch, searching. Near the floor, almost invisible in shadow, his fingers found something. An indentation, small, circular. He knelt and shined the light directly on it. A keyhole. Old, weathered, filled with decades of dust, but unmistakably a keyhole. Marcus's heart rate kicked up. A locked door meant something worth locking away. But where would the key be? Dale hadn't mentioned anything. The cave had been empty when Marcus bought it, except for that one old wooden chair he'd moved to Ethan's room. The chair! Marcus went to Ethan's room and carefully, quietly, picked up the chair and carried it to the main room. He set it down and examined every inch. The seat was worn smooth, the legs were solid, The back had simple carved designs, nothing special. Then he turned it over. Taped to the underside of the seat, yellowed and brittle with age, was a small iron key. Marcus's hands trembled as he peeled the tape away. The key was cold in his palm, heavier than it looked. This was real. This was happening. He returned to the hidden door and inserted the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly, like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. He turned it. Click! The sound echoed through the cave like a gunshot. Marcus jumped, his heart hammering. He glanced toward the hallway where Ethan slept. Nothing. His son hadn't stirred. Marcus pushed against the stone door. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that made his teeth ache, the door shifted inward an inch. He pushed harder, putting his shoulder into it. The door swung open smoothly despite its weight, revealing a passage descending into absolute darkness. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and minerals and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Age. History. Secrets. He stood at the threshold, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, every instinct screaming at him to close the door and forget this. Nothing good lived in hidden places, nothing safe. But curiosity was stronger than fear. It always had been. Marcus stepped into the passage. The tunnel was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, with walls that had been carved smooth by tools rather than nature. The ceiling was just high enough that Marcus didn't have to duck, though he felt the weight of the rock pressing down from above. Wooden support beams appeared every 10 feet or so, old but still solid. The passage descended at a gentle angle, going deeper into the hillside. Marcus moved slowly, one hand trailing along the cool wall for balance. His flashlight beam revealed nothing but more tunnel stretching ahead. After what felt like 100 feet but was probably closer to 50, the passage curved slightly to the left, then straightened. The air grew noticeably cooler, damper. Marcus's breath came out in small clouds. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber. Marcus swept his flashlight around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The chamber was roughly circular, about 15 feet across, with a ceiling that rose to maybe 8 feet. And it was filled with stuff. Old mining equipment sat against one wall, rusted pickaxes, a wheelbarrow with flat tires, coils of rope that had probably been down here for decades. There were wooden crates stacked haphazardly, some open and empty, others nailed shut. A workbench covered in tools that looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1960s. But that wasn't what made Marcus stop cold. On the far wall, mounted in the rock itself, was a door. Not a hidden stone door like the one he'd just come through, but an actual wooden door with brass fixtures and a proper frame. Someone had built this, installed it, meant for it to be here. Marcus approached slowly, his flashlight beam steady on the door. It was old but intact, the wood weathered but not rotted. He tried the brass handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. He examined the lock mechanism. It was old-fashioned, the kind that required a skeleton key. He didn't have a skeleton key. He had a crowbar. Marcus positioned the crowbar near the lock and applied steady pressure. The wood creaked. He pushed harder, putting his weight into it. With a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber, the wood around the lock splintered. The door swung inward, revealing another passage beyond. This one was different from the rough carved tunnel behind him. The walls here were finished, smooth plaster or concrete, painted a dull gray that had yellowed with age, and mounted on the ceiling every 20 feet were light fixtures. Old fixtures with glass shades wired into the rock itself. Someone had lived down here, or worked down here. This wasn't just a survival bunker. This was something bigger, more deliberate. Marcus followed the passage, his footsteps echoing eerily. It continued for maybe another 50 feet before opening into a much larger space. He stepped through and stopped, his breath catching. The room was rectangular, maybe 30 feet by 20 feet. The ceiling was reinforced with steel beams that looked professional, industrial. And along every wall were shelves, metal shelving units loaded with boxes, crates, containers of all sizes. Marcus approached the nearest shelf with trembling hands. He pulled down a wooden crate, heavy and solid. Setting it on the floor, he pried open the lid with his crowbar. Inside, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, was a bronze statue of a horse, small, maybe 10 inches tall, but exquisitely detailed. Every muscle, every strand of mane carved with incredible precision. At the base was a small tarnished plaque, Greece, 5th century BC. Marcus's hands started shaking so badly he nearly dropped the statue. He set it down carefully and opened another crate. 3 paintings, unframed, wrapped in protective cloth that felt like silk. He unfolded one with infinite care. The painting was old, really old. Renaissance era, if he had to guess, though Marcus's art history knowledge was limited to a single college course he'd taken to fulfill an elective. The style was unmistakable, though. Rich oils, religious imagery, incredible detail. And in the bottom corner, barely visible, was a signature he couldn't read, but instinctively knew was important. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He moved to another crate. This one was full of coins. Hundreds of them, each in its own protective plastic sleeve. Gold coins, silver coins. Coins stamped with dates from the 1800s. Another crate held jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets, each piece carefully catalogued on index cards yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat, precise. Pearl necklace, 1878, estate of... The rest was smudged and illegible. Marcus stumbled backward, his legs suddenly weak. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, flashlight rolling away from his nerveless fingers. The beam spun across the ceiling, throwing wild shadows. This wasn't just stuff. This was a collection. A massive, valuable, probably illegal collection. Someone had spent years, maybe decades, assembling all this and hiding it here. In a cave in the middle of nowhere. In the property Marcus had bought for $7,500 because he was desperate and had nowhere else to go. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to not completely lose his mind. After several minutes, Marcus stood on shaking legs and walked deeper into the room. More shelves, more crates, more boxes. The space seemed to go on forever, disappearing into darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. And at the far end of the vast chamber, illuminated by his trembling flashlight beam, sat something that made his blood run cold. A vault, not a safe. Not a lockbox. A vault. The old-fashioned kind you'd see in bank heist movies. 8 feet tall, made of steel, with a massive wheel lock on the front and rivets the size of silver dollars. Someone hadn't just been collecting things down here. They'd been protecting something. Guarding something so valuable it required a bank vault in a secret underground chamber beneath a forgotten cave house. Marcus approached the vault slowly, half convinced this was a dream. He'd wake up any second on that cold stone floor in his tiny bedroom, Ethan shaking his shoulder and asking what was for breakfast. But he didn't wake up. The vault was real, solid, imposing. Close to 9 feet tall and maybe 6 feet wide, made of steel that had been painted dark green decades ago. The paint was peeling now, showing rust underneath, but the structure looked sound. He tried the wheel lock. It didn't budge, locked tight. Marcus circled the vault, looking for any weakness, any clue. On the back panel near the floor, he found something. Scratched into the metal, barely visible unless you were looking for it, were 4 numbers. 9, 3, 6, 2. A combination? Marcus committed them to memory and returned to the front. The wheel lock had a combination dial, 4 number positions. He set the dial to 9, 3, 6, 2. Held his breath, pulled the handle. Nothing. He tried reversing the numbers. 2, 6, 3, 9. Still nothing. He tried every combination he could think of, his frustration mounting. 9632, 3296, 6239. Nothing worked. Marcus sat down with his back against the vault, exhausted and overwhelmed. He'd come so far, found this incredible hidden space, gotten right to the edge of whatever secret lay inside this vault, and now he was stopped by a combination lock he couldn't crack. That's when he looked up. Directly above the vault, mounted on the ceiling, was a small ventilation grate, and hanging from one of the grate's screws, almost invisible in the shadows, was a thin chain. Marcus stood, reached up, and pulled. The chain came free, and attached to its end was a small key. Modern, industrial, with a round head stamped with numbers 9362. His heart nearly stopped. That wasn't the combination for the wheel lock. Those were 4 separate pieces of information. The numbers were a year, 1962, the year carved above the cave entrance, the year this whole place had been built. Marcus examined the vault more carefully and found what he'd missed before. A slot on the side panel hidden in shadow. A keyhole, small, modern, designed for exactly the kind of key he was holding. He inserted the key with trembling hands, turned it. A series of mechanical clicks echoed through the chamber. Deep, heavy, final. The wheel lock released with a sound like a sigh. Marcus grabbed the wheel with both hands and turned. It moved smoothly despite its age, rotating counterclockwise. When it stopped, he pulled the handle. The vault door swung open with a low groan of metal on metal. Marcus stepped back, flashlight raised, hardly daring to breathe. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The vault's interior was lined with deep red velvet, faded but still intact, and mounted on custom shelving that looked like it had been installed by a professional were paintings. Dozens of them. Different sizes, different styles, all carefully secured and preserved. Marcus stepped closer, his flashlight beam moving from canvas to canvas. Even with his limited knowledge, he recognized some of the styles. Impressionist, modernist, classical. These weren't copies or reproductions. These were originals. Old, valuable, impossible. In the very back, mounted on a specially reinforced shelf, was a single painting that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It was a portrait of a woman, beautiful, serene, dark clothing against a dark background, her face emerging from shadow with almost supernatural luminosity. The technique was masterful. Every brushstroke visible, every detail perfect. And in the bottom corner was a signature Marcus had seen in textbooks, in documentaries, in museum catalogs. Rembrandt. This was a Rembrandt. An actual Rembrandt. In a vault under a cave house Marcus had bought for $7,500. He stumbled backward, nearly falling. His flashlight beam swung wildly across the vault's interior, revealing more impossibilities. Another painting that looked like a Monet. Was that a Vermeer? A Caravaggio? Marcus didn't know enough to be certain, but every instinct screamed that these were real, were priceless, were worth more money than he could comprehend. And there was more, so much more. Wooden boxes stacked floor to ceiling along the sides of the vault. Marcus opened the nearest one with shaking hands. Gold bars, real gold bars, each stamped with authenticity marks and serial numbers. He counted quickly. 20 bars in this box alone. Another box held stacks of currency, old bills, rare denominations, meticulously preserved in protective sleeves. The dates ranged from the 1800s to the 1960s. A third box contained documents, historical documents, handwritten letters on paper so old it crackled when Marcus touched it. Land deeds, treaties. A signature that looked like it might be Thomas Jefferson's but couldn't possibly be because that would be insane. Marcus sat down hard on the vault floor, surrounded by more wealth than he'd ever imagined existed outside of movies.
His mind reeled, trying to calculate, to process, to understand. The paintings alone, if they were real, if they were authenticated, could be worth tens of millions each. The gold was easily worth several million. The currency, the documents, the historical artifacts he could see stacked deeper in the vault. This wasn't just a collection. This was a fortune, a massive, probably illegal, definitely impossible fortune. And it was sitting under Marcus Brennan's cave house, under the property he'd bought because he was broke and desperate and out of options. He pulled out his phone, knowing there'd be no service this deep underground, but needing to document this somehow. To his shock, he had one bar. Apparently, that ventilation system connected to the surface somewhere. With trembling hands, Marcus took photos. The paintings, the gold, the documents, the vault itself. He took dozens of photos, needing proof this was real, that he wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion and stress. Then he just sat there in the vault, surrounded by treasures, his flashlight casting long shadows, and laughed, not from joy, from absolute, overwhelming disbelief, from the cosmic absurdity of it all. 2 weeks ago, he'd been facing foreclosure, facing homelessness, working 3 jobs and barely surviving. The town had mocked him for buying a cave, called him crazy, pitied him. And now he was sitting in a vault containing what had to be $100 million. Maybe more, maybe much more. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. But it was real. Marcus stood slowly and began examining the rest of the vault more systematically. There were more boxes, more crates, more treasures, rare books with leather bindings and gold leaf pages, ancient coins from civilizations Marcus had only read about in history books, sculptures, pottery, jewelry encrusted with gems that caught his flashlight beam and threw rainbows across the velvet walls. Each item had been catalogued meticulously. Small white cards attached to each piece, written in the same neat handwriting he'd seen on the jewelry index cards. Acquired April 1967, authenticated by... Names Marcus didn't recognize, values listed in amounts that made his head spin. At the very back of the vault, mounted on the wall behind all the shelving, Marcus found a leather-bound journal. He pulled it down carefully, the leather cracking slightly under his fingers. The first page read, Collection Inventory, assembled 1963 through 1972. Curator, Dr. Victor Ashford. Marcus flipped through the pages. Hundreds of entries. Every item in this vault listed with acquisition date, authentication notes, historical significance, and estimated value at time of purchase. The numbers climbed, 10,000 here, 50,000 there, 200,000 for a painting, 500,000 for a sculpture. By the time Marcus reached the end of the journal, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the book. Total estimated collection value as of December 1972, $87 million. And that was in 1972 dollars. In today's money, adjusted for inflation and increased art values, this collection could be worth... Marcus couldn't even calculate it. 200 million? 300 million? More? At the very end of the journal was a letter, written in shakier handwriting than the neat entries before it. To whoever finds this, I imagine by now you're overwhelmed. I know I was when I first started collecting. This began as a passion, a love of history, of art, of preserving beautiful things the world seemed determined to let disappear. But somewhere along the way, passion became obsession. I spent my fortune acquiring these pieces. I built this vault to protect them. I carved tunnels into the rock to hide them from a world I no longer trusted. My wife left me. My children stopped calling. My colleagues thought I'd lost my mind. And in the end, I died alone in the cave I'd built to house the things I loved more than people. If you're reading this, you've inherited both my life's work and my greatest failure. These treasures were meant to be shared, studied, cherished by the world. I never had the courage to release them. I was too afraid they'd be seized, sold, scattered.
I was too afraid of losing control. Perhaps you'll be braver than I was. Perhaps you'll do what I couldn't. Give these pieces back to the world. They don't belong to one person. They never did. But I won't tell you what to do. That choice is yours alone. Dr. Victor Ashford, March 1974. Marcus closed the journal and sat in the silence of the vault for a long time, his mind churning. Dr. Victor Ashford. The eccentric Dale had mentioned. The man who'd built this cave house and then died mysteriously. The man who'd spent decades assembling one of the largest private art collections in history and then hidden it away from the world. And now it belonged to Marcus. Legally, technically, impossibly, it was his. He thought about Ethan sleeping peacefully above him, about the foreclosure notice he'd received 2 weeks ago, about the 3 jobs he worked just to afford food, about the town that had mocked him for buying a cave. This collection could solve every problem Marcus had, could give Ethan opportunities Marcus had never dreamed possible, could change their lives completely, but it could also destroy them. These pieces, Marcus didn't need an expert to know that many of them had been acquired through questionable means, possibly stolen, probably illegal. If he tried to sell them, he'd face questions he couldn't answer, investigations he couldn't survive. And there was something else, something in Dr. Ashford's letter that struck deep. I died alone in the cave I'd built to house the things I loved more than people. Marcus thought about Sarah, about how she'd always valued experiences over possessions, people over things, about how she'd probably laugh at all this, a cave full of hidden treasure, like something from a children's story. But she'd also tell him to do the right thing, whatever that was. Marcus checked his phone. 2:47 in the morning. He'd been down here for hours. Ethan would wake up in a few hours, and Marcus needed to figure out what came next. He stood, took one last look around the vault, and began the long walk back through the passages, through the chambers, back to the cave house above. As he emerged into the main room, closing the hidden door behind him and tucking the iron key safely into his pocket, Marcus realized something fundamental had changed. Yesterday, he'd been the poor widower everyone pitied, the struggling single father barely surviving, the guy who'd made the worst investment in town history. Today, he was potentially one of the richest men in Arizona, maybe in the country, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. He lay down on his sleeping bag but didn't close his eyes, just stared at the stone ceiling, his mind racing through impossible scenarios and consequences and choices that would define the rest of his life. In the next room, Ethan slept peacefully, dreaming 7-year-old dreams, completely unaware that everything had just changed. Everything. Marcus didn't sleep that night. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw paintings worth millions, gold bars stacked like firewood, documents that belonged in the Smithsonian. By the time dawn crept through the small windows of the cave house, he'd made a decision. He needed information, real information, not speculation or guesswork, but facts about who Dr. Victor Ashford had been, where this collection had come from, and what Marcus was really dealing with. That meant research. At 6:30, he gently shook Ethan awake. "Hey, buddy, we're going to do something different today." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "Different how? How would you like to spend the day at the library? They have a kids section with books and computers. You can read or play games while Daddy does some work." "Can I get a library card?" Marcus felt his throat tighten at the simple request. "Yeah, we can get you a library card." By 8 o'clock, they were walking through the doors of the Redmont Valley Public Library. The building was old, built sometime in the 1930s with that solid Depression-era architecture that suggested permanence and dignity. Inside smelled like old paper and air conditioning and possibility. Margaret, the librarian who'd known Sarah, looked up from the circulation desk with surprise. "Marcus! Ethan, what a wonderful surprise!" "Hi, Mrs. Margaret," Ethan said shyly. "We need to get him a library card," Marcus said. "And I need to do some research. Local history, property records, that kind of thing. Margaret's eyes lit up. The library had been fighting budget cuts for years, and any patron showing genuine interest in research was a gift. Of course, let me get Ethan set up first, then I'll show you our archives. 20 minutes later, Ethan was happily settled in the children's section with a stack of books about dinosaurs and space, and Margaret was leading Marcus to a back room he'd never seen before. Most of our local archives are on microfiche, she explained, pulling out drawer after drawer of small film cartridges. Newspapers going back to 1935, property records, birth and death certificates, all sorts of things. What specifically are you looking for? Marcus hesitated. How much should he reveal? I'm trying to learn about the history of the property I bought, the cave house out on County Road 47. Margaret's eyebrows rose. The old Ashford place? That's been empty for decades. Ashford? You know the name? Oh, everyone in town over a certain age knows about Dr. Victor Ashford. He was quite the character back in the 60s and 70s. Brilliant man, very wealthy, but also very strange. Kept to himself mostly. Marcus's heart was pounding. What else do you know about him? Margaret thought for a moment. He built that cave house himself. Well, hired contractors. But it was his design. People thought he was crazy, building a home inside a cliff. But he had his reasons, I suppose. Privacy, mainly. He was an art collector, I believe. Or maybe it was antiques. I can't quite remember. Art collector, Marcus confirmed, trying to keep his voice steady. That's right. There was some scandal when he died. The family claimed he had this massive collection worth millions, but when they searched the property, they found nothing. Some people thought the family was just being greedy, making up stories about hidden treasure. Others thought maybe Dr. Ashford had sold everything before he died and the family just didn't know. Marcus forced himself to breathe normally. When did he die? Oh, let me think. 1974? 75? Something like that. Heart attack, I believe. Very sudden. He was only in his 50s. She showed Marcus how to use the microfiche machine and left him to his research. For the next 4 hours, Marcus barely looked up. He started with property records. The cave house had been purchased by Dr. Victor Thomas Ashford in March of 1962 for $8,000, a significant sum at the time, from the Federal Bureau of Land Management. The land had previously been undeveloped wilderness. Building permits showed that Ashford had hired contractors to carve the initial cave dwelling, with permits filed for electrical, plumbing, and ventilation systems. Everything appeared legitimate, above board. The permitted structure was listed as extending 30 feet into the hillside. Marcus now knew it went much deeper. Ashford must have continued excavating on his own, in secret, without permits or oversight. Next, Marcus searched for information about Dr. Ashford himself. The microfiche newspaper archives revealed a fascinating picture. Dr. Victor Thomas Ashford, born 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. Ph.D. in art history from Yale. Independently wealthy from a family textile fortune. Moved to Arizona in 1961. Ostensibly for health reasons. The dry climate was supposed to be good for his asthma. But Marcus suspected the real reason was isolation. Arizona in the 60s was still relatively unpopulated, especially out in the hills. The perfect place to disappear, to hide something. Articles from the Redmont Valley Gazette showed that Ashford had been active in the community initially. He'd donated money to the library. This very library Marcus was sitting in. He'd funded a scholarship at the local high school. He'd even served briefly on the town council. But by 1965, the articles stopped. Ashford had withdrawn from public life completely. Marcus found an article from December 1974 with the headline, "Local Philanthropist Dr. Ashford Dies at 50." The obituary was brief. Dr. Victor Ashford, age 50, had died of apparent heart failure at his home. He was survived by an ex-wife and 2 adult children who lived out of state. Services were private. But 3 months later, another article appeared. Mystery surrounds Ashford Estate.
Marcus read it with growing unease. The estate of Dr. Victor Ashford remained in legal limbo as his children contested the distribution of assets. According to sources close to the family, Dr. Ashford had claimed to possess an art collection worth approximately $80 million. However, when executors searched his property, no such collection was found. The cave dwelling contained only modest furniture and personal effects. Bank records showed Ashford had spent lavishly over the previous decade, with large cash withdrawals totaling nearly $2 million, but no corresponding purchases could be traced. Either he was lying about the collection or he hid it somewhere very clever, attorney Martin Beck stated. "We've searched every inch of that property. There's nothing there." The estate was eventually settled, with the property being sold to a distant cousin for back taxes. That cousin, Marcus now knew, was Dale's uncle. The cousin had never lived there, never investigated further, just left it sitting empty for decades before Dale inherited it and finally sold it to Marcus. Because nobody believed the collection existed. Nobody thought to look deeper. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. He needed more. He needed to know if any of these pieces were stolen, if they were connected to crimes. That would determine everything. He spent another hour searching for articles about art thefts in the 60s and 70s. And then he found it. A front-page story from the New York Times, February 1973. 17 masterpieces stolen in gallery heist. Marcus read the article 3 times, his blood turning colder with each pass. Thieves had broken into the prestigious Carlyle Gallery in Manhattan during a February snowstorm, disabling alarms and making off with 17 paintings valued at over $30 million, a staggering sum in 1973. The collection included works attributed to Rembrandt, Monet, Vermeer, and several other masters. The heist was one of the largest in American history. The paintings were never recovered. No arrests were ever made. Marcus pulled out his phone and compared the descriptions in the article to the photos he'd taken in the vault. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. 3 of the paintings matched. Perfectly. A Rembrandt portrait of a woman in dark clothing, a Monet landscape with water lilies, a Vermeer interior scene with a woman reading a letter. All 3 were in Ashford's vault. All 3 had been stolen 52 years ago. Marcus searched for more. Another article from 1968. Museum robbery. Ancient Greek sculptures disappear. Boston Museum of Fine Arts. 6 sculptures from the ancient Greece collection, including a bronze horse statue dated to the 5th century BC. Gone overnight. Never recovered. Marcus had seen that horse statue. He'd held it in his hands, article after article, theft after theft. A pattern emerged over nearly a decade, high-profile robberies, always professional, always unsolved, always with no leads, and the timeline matched perfectly with Ashford's large cash withdrawals and his retreat from public life. Dr. Victor Ashford hadn't just been an art collector. He'd been a criminal. Or at least, he'd been buying from criminals, funding thefts, creating a market for stolen masterpieces. And he'd hidden it all beneath a cave house in the middle of nowhere. Marcus felt sick. This wasn't just a fortune. This was evidence of dozens of crimes. These pieces belonged to museums, galleries, collectors who'd been robbed, families who'd lost heirlooms, institutions that had lost irreplaceable pieces of human heritage. He couldn't keep this secret. Morally, legally, ethically, he couldn't. But if he reported it, what would happen to him? To Ethan? Would they lose everything again? Would Marcus be suspected of involvement? Would they accuse him of planning this, of somehow knowing what was down there before he bought the property? His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. "Ethan doing okay? When will you be back?" Marcus checked the time. 1:30. He'd been at the library for over 5 hours. "On our way," he typed back. "Sorry it took so long." He gathered his notes, thanked Margaret, and collected Ethan from the children's section. His son was covered in dinosaur stickers and carrying 3 books he'd checked out. "Did you find what you needed, Daddy?" Marcus looked down at his innocent, trusting son and felt his heart break a little. "Yeah, buddy, I think I did." That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Marcus sat at the old desk he'd salvaged from a thrift store and made a complete inventory using his photos and Dr. Ashford's journal. The numbers were staggering: 37 paintings, including at least 7 that matched descriptions of stolen works. Conservative estimate of value based on recent auction prices for comparable pieces: $112 million. 243 gold bars of various sizes. Current market value, $42 million. 6,312 rare coins, ranging from ancient Greek to American gold pieces. Conservative estimate, $23 million. 42 sculptures and antiquities, including pieces from ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, and Asia. Conservative estimate, $18 million. 17 historical documents, including letters from founding fathers, rare manuscripts, and what appeared to be one of the lost copies of the Declaration of Independence. Conservative estimate, $38 million. Jewelry, rare books, artifacts, pottery, and dozens of other pieces Marcus couldn't even begin to evaluate properly. Conservative estimate of $42 million. Total estimated value, $275 million. Marcus stared at the number until it stopped looking like currency and started looking like a prison sentence. He couldn't sell any of it, couldn't keep it hidden forever, couldn't pretend he hadn't found it. Every option led to disaster. Unless he reported it, unless he did the right thing, contacted the authorities, let the legal system sort it out. But then what? Would he get anything? A finder's fee? Or would they just take everything, thank him politely, and leave him exactly where he'd been 2 weeks ago, broke, desperate, and struggling? Marcus put his head in his hands and tried to think of what Sarah would tell him. She'd always been the moral compass in their relationship, the one who saw things in clear terms of right and wrong, while Marcus got tangled up in gray areas and what-ifs. She'd tell him to report it. He knew she would. She'd say that keeping stolen art was wrong no matter how much they needed the money. She'd say that some things mattered more than financial security. Easy for her to say when she wasn't the one raising a 7-year-old alone. Marcus felt immediately guilty for the thought. Sarah hadn't chosen to die. She'd fought like hell to stay alive, for him and for Ethan, and she'd raised Marcus to be better than his worst impulses. He'd report it. In the morning, he'd start making calls, finding out who to contact, how to handle this properly. But first, he needed to sleep. He needed to think clearly. Marcus was halfway to his room when he heard something outside. Footsteps. Definitely footsteps on the gravel near the entrance. He froze. It was after midnight. Nobody had any reason to be out here. The footsteps stopped. Then voices. Low. 2 people, maybe 3. Marcus crept to the window and peered out carefully. In the moonlight, he could see 3 figures standing near his truck. One was trying the truck's doors, locked, thank God. Another was taking photos of the cave entrance with a phone. The third figure was looking directly at the window where Marcus stood. Marcus jerked back, heart hammering. Had they seen him? The voices grew louder, arguing about something. "I'm telling you, this is the place. My grandmother was Ashford's housekeeper. She said he was always going into that back room, the one nobody was supposed to enter. She swore there were tunnels." So what? Guy's been dead 50 years. If there was anything valuable, someone would have found it by now. Unless they didn't know where to look, unless they bought the property without having any idea what they were sitting on. Marcus's blood ran cold. They knew. Someone knew about the collection. "We need to get inside. Search properly." "Breaking and entering? Are you insane?" "It's not breaking and entering if nobody sees us. Besides, if there's really $80 million hidden down there, I think we can afford a good lawyer." The voices faded as the figures walked around the perimeter of the property. Marcus waited, barely breathing, until he heard a car engine start somewhere down the road and drive away. Only then did he allow himself to move. He checked on Ethan, still sleeping peacefully, then went to the hidden door and made sure it was securely locked. He wedged a chair under the main door handle. They'd come back. He knew they would, and next time they might not just stand outside talking. Marcus didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in the main room with a baseball bat across his knees, watching the windows, listening for any sound of approach. The next morning he found it. Tucked under his truck's windshield wiper was an envelope. No name, no address. Just an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in all capitals. "We know what's under your house. We know what Ashford hid. You have two choices. Share it with us or lose everything. We'll be in touch." Marcus crumpled the paper in his fist, then immediately smoothed it out again. This was evidence, proof that someone else knew, proof that he was in danger. He needed help, real help, professional help. But first, he needed to get Ethan somewhere safe. Marcus called Father Jim from the church. The priest answered on the second ring. "Marcus, everything okay?" "No. Father, I need a favor. A big one. Can you watch Ethan for a few days? I'll pay you, of course, Marcus, what's wrong? You sound terrified." Marcus looked around the cave house, at the hidden door concealing $275 million in stolen art, at the crumpled threat lying on his makeshift desk. "I found something in the house, and now someone else knows I found it, and I don't know what to do." There was a long pause. "Come to the rectory. Bring Ethan. We'll figure this out." An hour later, Marcus sat in Father Jim's small office while Ethan played video games in the next room. The priest listened without interrupting as Marcus told him everything. The hidden door, the tunnels, the vault, the collection, the research, the estimated value, the stolen pieces, the threatening note. When Marcus finished, Father Jim sat back in his chair and whistled low. $275 million, give or take. And at least some of it is stolen. At least half, probably more. The priest was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, you know you can't keep this secret. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's too dangerous. Whoever sent that note, they're not going to give up, and if they think you're trying to keep the collection for yourself..." "I know. I was already planning to report it. I wanted one night to think about it, to figure out how. You need a lawyer, a very good lawyer who specializes in recovered property and antiquities law, and you need to contact the FBI before those people come back." Marcus rubbed his face. "And then what? They take everything, investigate me for months, and I'm back to being broke with 3 jobs and nowhere to live." "Maybe. Or maybe there's a finder's fee, legal precedent for people who recover stolen property. But Marcus, even if you walk away with nothing, you're doing the right thing. These pieces belong to museums, to families, to history, not to one desperate man in a cave." Marcus knew he was right, had known it from the moment he'd discovered the connection to the art heists, but knowing and accepting were two different things. "Will you watch Ethan? Just until I can get this sorted out?" "Of course. He can stay as long as needed. But Marcus, be careful. People kill for this kind of money." Marcus hadn't needed the reminder. He was already thinking about the 3 figures outside his house, about the threatening note, about all the ways this could go horribly wrong. That afternoon, Marcus drove 3 hours to Phoenix. Father Jim had given him the name of a law firm that specialized in complex property cases. He'd called ahead, managed to get an emergency appointment, and now sat in a sleek conference room on the 20th floor of a glass tower that probably cost more than his entire cave house. 3 people sat across from him. Linda Hartley, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 50s, David Morrison, a specialist in antiquities law, and Rebecca Sloan, a former FBI agent who now worked as a private investigator. Marcus had spent the last hour telling his story and showing them his photos and documentation.
When he finished, Linda leaned back in her leather chair. "Mr. Brennan, do you understand the magnitude of what you found?"
"I think so." "No, I don't think you do." She pulled up something on her tablet. 3 years ago, a construction worker in Massachusetts found a single Rembrandt painting hidden in a wall during renovations. Single painting. He received a finder's fee of $10 million after legal battles that lasted 4 years. Marcus felt dizzy. "You've found what amounts to the largest cache of recovered art and stolen antiquities in modern American history. We're talking about pieces museums have been searching for since the 1960s. The cultural and historical value alone is incalculable." David Morrison leaned forward. "The legal landscape here is incredibly complex. Some of these pieces were outright stolen. Those will have to be returned to their rightful owners or institutions. But museums typically pay substantial finder's fees for recovered stolen property. 10 to 20% is standard. Others," Linda added, "appear to have been acquired legally by Ashford, even if through morally questionable channels. Those pieces might be considered yours outright as part of the property you purchased." Rebecca spoke up for the first time. "But you have a more immediate problem. Someone else knows about this collection. That threatening note you received isn't amateur hour. Whoever sent it has done research, has connections to Ashford's past, and is willing to resort to intimidation. Possibly worse." Marcus felt cold. "What do I do?" "You let us handle it," Linda said firmly. "We file a report with the FBI tomorrow. We contact every relevant museum and institution. We get ahead of this story before those people force your hand. And we make sure you're protected throughout the process." "Protected how?" "Security, legal representation, a media strategy. Mr. Brennan, once this goes public, and it will go public, your life will explode. Reporters will camp outside your house. Every art historian in the world will want to examine the collection. The IRS will have questions, and whoever sent you that note will likely escalate." Marcus thought about Ethan, safe at Father Jim's rectory. Thank God he'd gotten his son out. "How long will this take?" "The investigation? Months, maybe years. Authentication alone will take time. Legal proceedings to determine ownership of each piece. Negotiations with museums and collectors. This will be your life for the foreseeable future. And at the end of it, what do I get?" Linda smiled. "Conservatively? Based on finder's fees for the stolen pieces, outright ownership of the legally acquired items, and potential rewards from insurance companies, you're looking at somewhere between $25 and $50 million. The room spun. Marcus gripped the edge of the conference table. "But," Rebecca added seriously, "you have to survive that long. These people who know about the collection won't stop. We need to move fast." They spent the next 2 hours planning. Linda would file paperwork with the FBI first thing in the morning. David would begin contacting museums. Rebecca would arrange security for the cave house and start investigating who had sent the threatening note. Marcus would go home, secure the site, and wait. "Don't go into the vault again," Rebecca warned. "Don't touch anything else. The FBI will want everything exactly as you found it." Marcus drove home as the sun set over the Arizona hills, painting everything the color of rust and old blood. His phone rang as he pulled onto County Road 47. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then, thinking it might be the lawyers, he picked up. "Hello? Mr. Brennan?" A man's voice, calm, educated, threatening in its very normalcy. "I hope you've had time to think about our offer." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what Victor Ashford hid beneath that cave. Someone who has just as much claim to it as you do." "I don't know what you're talking about." A laugh, dark, amused. "Please, we've been watching you.
We saw you go to the library. We know you took photos in the vault. We know you drove to Phoenix today to meet with lawyers. You're planning to report the collection, aren't you?" Marcus's blood ran cold. They'd been following him all day. "That would be a mistake," the voice continued. "The FBI will tie this up in legal proceedings for years. Museums will fight over ownership. You'll get nothing. But if you work with us, if you give us access to the vault, we can move certain pieces quietly. Sell them to private collectors who don't ask questions. Split the proceeds. Everyone wins. Except the museums who were robbed, the collectors who lost their property. They have insurance. They've moved on. This is ancient history, Mr. Brennan. But your son's future? That's very much present tense." The implied threat made Marcus see red. "Stay away from my son." "We're not monsters. We just want what's fair. What should have been ours in the first place." "Ours? Who are you?" "Victor Ashford's grandson. My mother was his daughter. She died 10 years ago, bitter that her father had wasted their inheritance on stolen art and hidden it where no one could find it. But I found it. I knew it was there. I just needed someone stupid enough to actually buy that worthless cave." A pause. "Thank you for that, by the way." Marcus pulled into the driveway of the cave house. 2 figures stood by the entrance, waiting. "We're at your house now, Mr. Brennan. I think it's time we talked face to face." The line went dead. Marcus sat in his truck, hands shaking, staring at the 2 men silhouetted against his door. One was tall, athletic. The other was shorter, heavier. Both stood with the casual confidence of people used to getting what they wanted. He could drive away, could go back to Phoenix, to the lawyers, to safety. But they knew about Ethan, knew about Father Jim's rectory. If Marcus ran now, they'd just find another way to apply pressure. He had to face this. Marcus climbed out of his truck slowly, keeping his hands visible. "You're trespassing on private property." The taller man stepped forward. He was probably 45, well-dressed in expensive casual clothes, with Ashford's dark eyes and sharp features. "Private property that should have been mine. That collection was assembled by my grandfather with my family's money. You have no right to it. I bought this property legally. Everything under it is mine. You bought an empty cave for pocket change. You didn't buy $80 million in art that my grandfather stole from his own family to fuel his obsession." Marcus stood his ground. "Then take it to court. Sue me. But you don't get to threaten me, follow me, intimidate me into giving you access to something that isn't yours." The shorter man moved to the side, flanking. Marcus suddenly felt very aware that he was alone, outnumbered, miles from anyone who might help. "Court takes years," Ashford's grandson said, "and lawyers are expensive. I'm offering you a simpler solution. Let us into the vault. Let us take what's rightfully ours. You keep the rest. The gold, the coins, whatever you want. Just give us the paintings. The pieces my grandfather stole from my family's legacy." "No." The grandson's eyes hardened. "That's your final answer? Come back with a court order or don't come back at all." The 2 men exchanged glances. Then the grandson smiled, cold and sharp. "You're making a mistake, but I suppose you'll figure that out soon enough. Enjoy your cave, Mr. Brennan. I wonder how safe it'll be when word gets out what's hidden beneath it." They walked back to a black Mercedes parked down the road. Marcus didn't move until the taillights disappeared. Then he ran inside, locked the door, and immediately called Rebecca Sloan. "They were here," he said without preamble. "Ashford's grandson. He knows everything. He's threatening to go public if I don't give him access to the vault." "Did he threaten you physically?" "Not directly, but it was implied." "Okay, listen carefully. I'm sending a security team to your location tonight. They'll be there within 2 hours. Pack whatever you need. You and your son are going to a hotel until we can get this under control. Do not go back to that vault. Do not open the hidden door. Just pack and wait." Marcus looked around the cave house that had been his salvation and was now becoming his prison. This is really happening, isn't it? Yes, but we're going to handle it. You did the right thing contacting us. Now let us protect you. After hanging up, Marcus walked to the back wall, to the hidden door. He pressed his palm against the cool stone and thought about everything waiting behind it. $275 million in art and artifacts. A legacy of obsession and theft. A fortune that had destroyed Victor Ashford and was now threatening to destroy Marcus too. But maybe it could also be his redemption, his chance to do something that mattered, to give these stolen treasures back to the world, if he survived long enough to make that choice. Outside, the Arizona night pressed close around the cave. And somewhere in that darkness, Marcus knew Ashford's grandson was planning his next move. The war for the collection had begun. The security team arrived exactly 2 hours later, 3 former police officers in an unmarked van with equipment that looked military-grade. Rebecca Sloan had sent the best, and Marcus felt simultaneously safer and more terrified. The fact that he needed armed security meant this was real. Dangerously, life-changingly real. By midnight, Marcus was checked into a hotel in Phoenix under a fake name. Ethan still safe at Father Jim's rectory. He sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone, knowing what he had to do but struggling to make his fingers move. Finally, at 1:15 in the morning, he opened his email and began typing. Dear Special Agent Torres, FBI Art Crime Team. My name is Marcus Brennan. 3 weeks ago, I purchased a property in Redmont Valley, Arizona for $7,500. Yesterday, I discovered a hidden vault beneath the property containing what I believe to be stolen artwork, artifacts, and historical documents worth approximately $275 million. I am writing to report this discovery and request guidance on proper procedures for... His fingers flew across the phone's keyboard, pouring out everything: the hidden door, the tunnels, the vault, Dr. Victor Ashford's journal, the threatening visits from Ashford's grandson. He attached photos, documentation, his research notes from the library. At 2:37 in the morning, he hit send. Then he lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling, knowing he'd just changed his life forever. Again, he didn't expect a response until morning. But at 3:45, his phone rang. FBI Field Office, Phoenix. Mr. Brennan, this is Special Agent Maria Torres. I need you to tell me everything, right now. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of interviews, statements, and bureaucratic procedures that made Marcus's head spin. Special Agent Torres arrived at his hotel with 2 other agents at 6 in the morning. They questioned him for 4 hours straight, recording everything, taking notes, asking the same questions in different ways to check for inconsistencies. You expect us to believe you just stumbled onto this? One agent asked skeptically. I bought a cave house because I was facing foreclosure, Marcus said for the 5th time. I found a hidden door. I opened it. I didn't know what was down there until I found it. And you just happened to research art theft history the very next day? I found a statue marked Greece, 5th century BC, and paintings that looked really old. I wanted to know if I'd found something important or just a wealthy eccentrics collection. Turns out it was both. They verified everything. His financial records showing he was broke, his purchase documents for the property, his work history, his late wife's medical bills. Every detail of Marcus's desperate life laid bare for federal agents to examine. By day 3, Agent Torres's skepticism had shifted to something like grudging respect. Mr. Brennan, I've been working art crimes for 15 years. Most of the people who discover stolen property are somehow involved in the original theft. But you, she shook her head, you're exactly what you appear to be. A desperate man who got unbelievably lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. Which is it? She smiled slightly. Ask me in 6 months. The FBI descended on the cave house like an invading army. Agents, art historians, authentication experts, photographers, evidence technicians, dozens of people in the once empty property. They documented everything, cataloging each piece, taking thousands of photographs, setting up climate-controlled storage for the most delicate items. Marcus watched from behind police tape as they carried painting after painting out of his home, each one worth millions, each one evidence in a crime that had happened before he was born. It felt surreal. The media found out on day 4. Marcus woke up to his phone exploding with notifications, news alerts, text messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. The headline on CNN read, "Widowed father discovers $275 million in stolen art hidden beneath cave house." His photo, pulled from Facebook, the one from Sarah's funeral where he looked hollow and broken, was on every news site. The story had everything: hidden treasure, stolen masterpieces, a struggling single father, a mysterious millionaire collector. Cable news couldn't get enough. By noon, reporters had found the hotel. Marcus watched from his window as news vans parked in the lot, satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. "You need to make a statement," Linda Hartley told him over the phone. "Control the narrative before it controls you." That afternoon, Marcus stood in front of 24 cameras and tried not to throw up. "My name is Marcus Brennan. 3 weeks ago, I bought a cave house in Redmont Valley because it was all I could afford. I was facing foreclosure, working 3 jobs to support my 7-year-old son. I didn't know the property had any history beyond being unusual. When I discovered the hidden vault, I immediately contacted authorities. I'm cooperating fully with the FBI investigation, and I'm committed to ensuring these pieces are returned to their rightful owners." "Mr. Brennan, are you hoping for a reward?" "Mr. Brennan, did you know about the collection before you bought the property?" "Mr. Brennan, how does it feel to be potentially one of the richest men in America?" Marcus ignored the shouted questions and walked away, Linda's hand on his elbow guiding him through the crowd. Back in Redmont Valley, everything changed overnight. The same people who'd mocked Marcus for buying a cave now couldn't stop talking about him. The grocery store where he'd worked suddenly had reporters in the aisles asking his former co-workers what Marcus had been like. "Always seemed like a good guy," Danny the stock boy told a CNN reporter. "Real quiet, never complained." The town council held an emergency meeting to discuss the media attention. Diane Marshall, who'd publicly humiliated Marcus just weeks ago, now praised him as a model citizen who did the right thing in extraordinary circumstances. Father Jim called to tell Marcus that people were driving out to the cave house just to take selfies in front of it. The property had become a tourist attraction overnight. "How's Ethan handling all this?" the priest asked. "He thinks it's cool that Daddy's on TV. He doesn't understand the rest of it yet. That's probably for the best." The authentication process took 3 months. Experts from museums around the world examined each piece, comparing them to stolen property databases, analyzing brush strokes and materials, consulting historical records. One by one, the pieces were confirmed. The Rembrandt portrait, stolen from the Carlyle Gallery, New York, February 1973. Estimated value, $48 million. The Monet water lilies, stolen from a private collector in Chicago, June 1968. Estimated value, $32 million. The Vermeer, stolen from the Carlyle Gallery heist. Estimated value, $56 million. On and on it went. 32 of the 37 paintings were confirmed stolen. The sculptures, the documents, the rare coins, most had been illegally acquired, but some pieces had been purchased legitimately by Ashford from legal dealers and auction houses. The gold bars were legal. The currency collection was legal. Several of the antiquities that Ashford had purchased from recognized dealers were legal. Total value of items Marcus had legal claim to: $87 million. Total value of stolen items where museums and collectors were offering finder's fees: $188 million. The legal battles began almost immediately. Ashford's grandson filed a claim asserting that as Dr. Ashford's heir, he had rights to any property left by his grandfather. Marcus's legal team countered that the collection had been deliberately hidden and abandoned, and that Marcus had purchased the property in good faith without knowledge of what it contained. Insurance companies that had paid out claims decades ago wanted their money back. Museums argued over which institution should receive which pieces. Collectors hired lawyers to fight for family heirlooms. Marcus sat through deposition after deposition, repeating his story until he could recite it in his sleep. The pressure was enormous. Some days he wondered if it would have been easier to just walk away, to pretend he'd never found that hidden door. But then he'd see photos of museum curators weeping with joy at the recovery of pieces they'd thought lost forever. He'd read articles about art history professors explaining the cultural significance of these works finally being returned to public view. He'd watched news segments showing schoolchildren visiting exhibitions of the newly recovered art. And he'd know he'd made the right choice. The settlement came 14 months after Marcus had first opened that vault. He sat in a conference room in Phoenix, surrounded by lawyers, mediators, FBI representatives, and museum officials. Linda Hartley presented the final terms. The recovered stolen property will be returned to the institutions and collectors from whom it was taken. In exchange for your cooperation, and as is standard in cases of good faith recovery, you'll receive finder's fees totaling $19.3 million. Marcus's hands trembled. $19 million. For doing nothing except finding something and reporting it. Additionally, Linda continued, the items Dr. Ashford purchased legally, the gold, the currency, the authenticated legal purchases, those are yours as part of the property you purchased. After taxes and legal fees, the net value to you is approximately $11.2 million. Marcus did the math in his head. $30 million, more than he could have imagined in 100 lifetimes. There's one more thing, David Morrison said. Several museums are offering an additional thank you payment if you agree to loan certain pieces for exhibitions before they're returned to their permanent homes. That would add roughly $2 million to your total, $32 million. Marcus thought about the foreclosure notice, about working 3 jobs, about eating peanut butter sandwiches on the floor of a cave, about his beautiful, brave Sarah, who died believing they'd never have enough. I accept, he said quietly. The room erupted in handshakes and congratulations, but Marcus just sat there, numb, trying to process what had just happened. He was rich. Actually, impossibly rich. Now he had to figure out what kind of man that would make him. The first thing Marcus did was set up an education fund for Ethan. $10 million in a trust that would cover every expense from elementary school through graduate school, plus a stipend for housing and living expenses. His son would never worry about money the way Marcus had, would never have to choose between college and survival. The second thing he did was establish the Sarah Brennan Foundation. He sat in Father Jim's office with estate planners and foundation lawyers, explaining his vision. My wife died because we couldn't afford better treatment options, because we delayed care because of costs, because the insurance system failed us. I want to help other families facing the same nightmare. $15 million. Dedicated to helping families dealing with catastrophic medical expenses. Grants for treatment. Housing assistance for families traveling for care. Support for children who'd lost parents to illness. Everything Marcus had needed when Sarah was dying. It should be called the Sarah Brennan Hope Foundation, Father Jim suggested, because that's what she gave you, hope. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Yeah, that's perfect! The remaining $7 million he kept for himself and Ethan, not for mansions or luxury cars or showing off, for security, for the ability to help others when needed, for knowing Ethan would be okay if something happened to Marcus. But what about the cave house?
Marcus stood in front of the empty vault, FBI evidence teams having removed everything weeks ago, and made a decision. This place had saved him, had given him shelter when he had nowhere else to go, had held a secret that changed his life. He couldn't just abandon it, couldn't let it go back to being a forgotten hole in a hillside. The Ashford Brennan Heritage Center opened 18 months later. Marcus had hired architects to expand the cave house carefully, respectfully, maintaining the original structure while adding climate-controlled gallery spaces carved deeper into the rock. The hidden passages were preserved and made safe for tours. The vault remained exactly as he'd found it, now a museum exhibit explaining Dr. Ashford's obsession and the eventual recovery of his collection. The main gallery displayed rotating exhibitions of the recovered pieces on loan from various museums. Visitors could see the actual Rembrandt, the Monet, the Vermeer, masterpieces that had been hidden for 50 years, now returned to public view. But the center was more than just an art museum. Marcus had added educational spaces, workshops where local kids could learn about art history and conservation. A small library with Ashford's journals and the story of the collection's recovery. Meeting rooms available free to community groups. And in the entrance, carved into the same rock that had sheltered Marcus when he'd had nothing, was a dedication. To everyone who's ever felt broken, forgotten, or desperate, your story isn't over. Sometimes the darkest places hold the most light. Sometimes the worst investments turn out to be the best decisions. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to open the door. The grand opening filled Redmont Valley with visitors. Museum curators, art historians, reporters, townspeople who'd never believed the collection existed. They walked through the galleries, marveling at the treasures, listening to docents explain the recovery story. But it was the town hall meeting the night before the opening that Marcus would remember forever. He stood at the podium in the same room where Diane Marshall had humiliated him, where council members had questioned his parenting, where the whole town had decided he was crazy for buying a cave. The room was packed, every chair filled, people standing along the walls. Diane sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Marcus gripped the edges of the podium and began. 20 months ago, I stood in this room as a widower facing foreclosure. I'd just bought a cave house for $7,500, every penny I had left in the world. I came here to register my address so my son could go to school, and I was mocked, pitied, told I was making the worst decision of my life. The room was silent. Several people had the grace to look ashamed. You weren't wrong, exactly. It was a desperate decision, a crazy decision, the decision of a man who had nothing left to lose. But here's what I learned. Sometimes when you have nothing to lose, you're finally free to find everything. He paused, looking around the room at familiar faces. I didn't find that collection because I was smart or special or destined for greatness. I found it because I was desperate enough to buy something nobody else wanted. I found it because I didn't give up when things got hard. I found it because I chose to look beyond the surface and see what others had missed. Diane Marshall was crying silently. And when I found it, I had a choice. Keep the secret and try to profit illegally, or do the right thing knowing it might cost me everything. I'm standing here today because I chose the right thing. Not because I'm a hero, I'm not. But because my wife Sarah taught me that integrity matters more than comfort, that doing right matters more than doing easy. He took a deep breath. This town mocked me. But you know what? I understand why. I was the guy who'd failed, who'd lost everything, who was living in a cave with his kid. I was a warning about what happens when life breaks you. But I hope now I'm something else. I hope I'm proof that broken things can be mended, that desperate people can find hope, that sometimes the worst moments are just the beginning of something extraordinary. He gestured to the papers in front of him. Tomorrow we open the Ashford Brennan Heritage Center. Free admission for all Redmont Valley residents, always. Educational programs for local schools, workshops for kids who want to learn about art and history. jobs for people who need work. This center isn't just about celebrating art, it's about celebrating second chances. The room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet. Marcus saw tears on faces throughout the crowd. Diane Marshall approached the podium, asking without words if she could speak. Marcus nodded and stepped aside. "Marcus," she said into the microphone, her voice shaking, "on behalf of this council and this town, I owe you an apology. We judged you, we mocked you, we questioned your choices and your ability to parent. We were cruel when you needed compassion, and you repaid our cruelty with generosity. You could have left this town in your rearview mirror the second you got that settlement check. Nobody would have blamed you. But instead, you built something here, something that will benefit our community for generations. I'm ashamed of how we treated you, and I'm grateful beyond words for who you turned out to be." She turned to face him directly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. We're all so sorry." Marcus stepped forward and did something that surprised even himself. He hugged her, and in that embrace, something in the room shifted. Forgiveness, real and tangible, filled the space. "We all make mistakes," Marcus said softly. "The measure of a person isn't whether they stumble. It's whether they get back up." Others came forward after the meeting. Carl from the grocery store bringing a gift card for Ethan. The mothers who'd gossiped in the school pickup line, offering to volunteer at the center. The teenagers who'd called the cave house creepy, asking if they could intern at the museum. One by one, the people who'd written Marcus off found ways to say they'd been wrong, and Marcus forgave them all. 2 days after the opening, Marcus drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. He'd been here dozens of times since Sarah's death, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't coming as the broken man who'd lost everything. He was coming as someone who'd found his way back. Sarah's headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and a line from her favorite poem, "Hope is the thing with feathers." Marcus sat in the grass beside her grave and talked. "Hey, Sarah, sorry it's been a few weeks. Things have been crazy, but I wanted to tell you something. Wanted to tell you in person even though I know you probably already know. I'm okay. For the first time since you left, I'm actually okay." He traced her name on the stone with his finger. "Remember how you used to say that when God closes a door, he opens a window? You were right. You were always right about stuff like that. The window was hidden in a cave house nobody wanted, and it led to something I never could have imagined." A breeze rustled through the cemetery trees. "I used the money the way you would have wanted. Ethan's education is covered. He'll never have to worry about paying for school or wonder if he can afford college. And I started a foundation in your name, the Sarah Brennan Hope Foundation. It's going to help families like ours, people dealing with medical costs that destroy lives, people who need someone to believe their life is worth fighting for." He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "I wish you could see the center. It's beautiful, Sarah. Art from all over the world, pieces that were lost for 50 years, now where people can see them and learn from them. And your picture is in the lobby, the one from our wedding where you're laughing because I stepped on your dress during the first dance. I wanted everyone who visits to know that none of this would have happened without you, without your optimism, without your belief that broken things deserve to be fixed." Marcus pulled out the grass next to her headstone, a nervous habit from all his previous visits. "Ethan's doing great, by the way. He's in 2nd grade now, smart as hell, just like you. He asks about you all the time, wants to know stories. So I tell him about the camping trip where we got soaked, about how you insisted on painting the nursery yourself even though you'd never painted before, about your terrible cooking and your beautiful laugh and how you made everything better just by being there." He wiped his eyes. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if there's an afterlife or if you're just gone. But if you can hear me, if you're somewhere watching, I want you to know. I didn't give up. When everything fell apart, when I wanted to quit, I kept going, for Ethan, for you, for the man you always believed I could be, even when I couldn't see it myself."
Marcus stood, brushing grass from his jeans. He placed his hand on the sun-warm granite of her headstone. I'm going to keep going, Sarah. Going to raise Ethan the way we planned. Going to help people through the foundation. Going to make you proud. And maybe someday when it's my turn, I'll see you again and you'll tell me I did okay. That I turned our tragedy into something meaningful. He kissed his fingers and pressed them to her name. I love you. I'll always love you. And I promise, I'm going to make this life count for both of us. As Marcus walked back to his truck, a new truck now, reliable and safe, he felt lighter than he had in years, not because the grief was gone, it would never be gone, but because he'd found a way to live with it, to carry it without letting it destroy him. That evening, Marcus picked up Ethan from school in the new truck. His son climbed in, backpack bouncing, face lit with excitement. Dad, we learned about the Hope Foundation in class today. Miss Martinez said you started it. Is that true? Marcus smiled. Yeah, buddy, it's true.
That's so cool! Can I help? When I'm bigger?
Marcus reached over and ruffled his son's hair. When you're bigger, you can do anything you want. But yeah, I'd love your help. They drove through Redmont Valley as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Past the grocery store where Marcus had stocked shelves. Past the library where he'd discovered the truth about the collection. Past the town hall where he'd been humiliated and later forgiven. And finally up the winding road to County Road 47 to the cave house that had saved them. The Ashford Brennan Heritage Center gleamed in the fading light, its entrance carved into the rust-colored cliff face. Cars filled the parking lot, visitors from around the world coming to see the recovered masterpieces and learn the story of the desperate man who'd found them. Dad, Ethan asked as they pulled up, do you ever wish things had been different? That Mom was still here and we were just normal? Marcus turned off the engine and looked at his son. This beautiful, resilient boy who'd survived so much and still found reasons to smile. Every single day, Marcus said honestly. I wish your mom was here more than anything in the world, but I don't wish away what happened after, because it taught me something important. That we're stronger than we think. That bad things can lead to good things. That sometimes you have to walk through the darkness to find the light. Ethan considered this seriously. Like finding the treasure in the cave? Exactly like that! They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching people walk into the center, marveling at the building carved into solid rock. I think Mom would be proud of us, Ethan said quietly. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Yeah, buddy, I think she would. Because sometimes the poorest people discover the richest truths. Sometimes the worst investments turn out to be blessings in disguise. Sometimes desperate decisions lead to extraordinary outcomes. And sometimes the man everyone wrote off as broken and defeated becomes exactly the kind of hero the world needs, not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to keep trying even when everything seems lost. Marcus Brennan had bought a cave house for $7,500 because he had no other choice. He'd found $275 million in hidden treasure because he was curious enough to look. And he'd built a legacy that would outlast him because he chose to do the right thing even when the easy thing would have been simpler. The town that had mocked him now celebrated him. The people who'd pitied him now respected him. And the widowed father who'd felt like a failure was now teaching his son and everyone watching that second chances are real if you're brave enough to reach for them. Marcus opened the truck door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Ethan jumped down beside him, grabbing his father's hand. Together they walked toward the entrance of the center, toward the future they'd built from impossible odds and desperate choices. Come on, Dad, Ethan said, pulling him forward. Let's go look at the paintings again. I want to show you my favorite. Marcus let himself be led by his son through the doors of the cave that had saved them, into the gallery filled with masterpieces that had been hidden for 50 years. And as they stood in front of that Rembrandt portrait, the woman emerging from shadow into light, Marcus understood what Dr. Ashford had never grasped. The real treasure had never been the art or the gold or the historical artifacts. The real treasure was what you did with your second chance, how you chose to use your fortune, whether you let darkness consume you or found ways to create light. Marcus had chosen light, and that, more than any amount of money, made him truly wealthy. Anyone can find treasure if they're desperate enough to look in unexpected places, but it takes real courage to turn that treasure into something that matters, something that heals, something that gives hope to everyone who's ever felt broken beyond repair. The man who was mocked for buying a cave house for $7,500 had become the man who proved that sometimes our worst moments are just the beginning of our greatest transformations. And his story, carved into the rock of that Arizona hillside, would inspire others for generations to come. Because every person who walked through those doors would learn the same lesson Marcus had discovered in his darkest hour, that second chances are real, that broken things can be mended, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, transformation, and unexpected miracles. Click to ride with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe broken beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings.